All right. Hope you all got a quick break. There's still a few hundred of you watching these summits, and I really want to thank all of you for sticking with this for the last few hours. There's a lot of activity happening. I kind of spent the last few minutes catching up with what's happening on our Discord. The hackathon's officially begun. A lot of people are thinking about ideas, talking to each other, talking about teams, and two more talks to go for the summit. And then we're going to spend the next 48 hours just looking at all the creative projects that come out of this. So I'm super excited for this next talk. Um, we've been talking for the last few talks and panels on what's happening from the artist side and the creative side, where people who are known in this industry through other means and have distribution have definitely are seeing the value of NFTs and benefiting off of what's happening in their ecosystem. But we definitely wanted to contrast that with what's happening at the grassroots of our ecosystem, whether that's DAOs, how NFT culture is changing, how should we think about ownership in this case and investing in this ecosystem. All these ideas we haven't really touched too much on. So the next panel is super interesting because we're going to talk about all these things and how we actually think about community in the space from a really fundamental level. I'm super excited to welcome Carlos, Samantha, Sirsu, and Michail to discuss community and solidarity in NFTs, and they're going to be talking about MintFund. I'll ask all of them to turn on their cameras, and we'll have Michail from Zora moderate this discussion, and let's get started without any further ado. So please welcome everybody here.
Thank you so much, Kartik. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very, very exciting panel about the MintFund. It's going to be funny because I'm, as much as I'm hosting, also part of MintFund. So you're not going to watch a traditional panel, but rather a informed conversation and reflection between friends and colleagues who have been spending the last couple of months doing something very very exciting. First round of introductions, maybe. I think I'm going to introduce myself probably afterwards. So let's go around and maybe, my esteemed colleagues, tell us a little bit who you are, what your connection was to NFT and technology and art pre-NFT and pre-MintFund, and maybe what has happened for you, let's say in the last 6 months that most certainly all felt like at least a decade. Samantha, since you sneezed yourself into the spotlight, tell us a little bit about yourself.
It was a slight cough, actually. Yeah, so I'm Samantha. During the day, I work for a foundation. I'm the creative content lead there. I work a lot with the artists that we onboard into the NFT space. Before I found my way into crypto, I was working for contemporary art museums in Los Angeles. And so really come from like a space of understanding artists and their practice. And how I ended up in crypto, I would say over the past year, I've really started to notice that a lot of artists, not just from like the visual sense, but musicians, poets, developers, coders, creatives of all kinds were really experimenting with NFTs. And yeah, there's just so much happening in the space that I would never imagine that I'd be working in crypto at some point in time. And then your last question was something that's felt like it's happened for a long time. What was it?
I was actually wondering, but it does not matter. I have so many more questions. I'll find them. Okay, because you are similar also with me. You have a background in, let's say, non-digital art or institution. Oh, I got a really, like one of those trigger words, institutionalized art. So I would like to talk to you a little bit later about that in particular, the similarities and differences. But maybe let's have Carlos, who is dialing in from Shanghai, and it's 4 a.m. So please, all of you at home, a warm applause for that much commitment to get up at 4 a.m. to face all of you. Carlos.
Thanks, Michail. Yeah, it's 4 a.m. In Beijing, close to Shanghai. But yeah, so my name is Carlos. Um, I'm currently the founder of Forefront, which is a social token aggregator, content aggregator market, as well as a contributor for Seed Club and obviously MintFund. But yeah, I think I really got interest. I've been in the space for a while now, but really around social tokens. But I got really into NFT and started to think about it more deeply when I was on Andrew Steenwood, podcast, and we were talking about all this, social tokens and stuff. And then he asked me like, which NFT do you own? And I couldn't really come up with one because I didn't. And from that moment, I started to go down the rabbit hole. And but yeah, until today, we are here, right? So, like you said, it's been a decade or two. I don't know.
Did you do before crypto?
So I did all my undergrad studies here in China, and 2015 was the year I started, learning about crypto, and 16 working for a crypto exchange. But before that, it was just your normal, job, right? Like, for a SaaS company, and it's always been a software developer. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, interesting. Ameer, now you are not only in technologies, you're also a crypto artist, but tell us a little bit about all of that.
Sure. My name is Ameer, Sirsu on Twitter. I'm very loud. I'm kind of a creative anarchist. Two ways, I think mainly because of the fact that I'm very gung-ho about inclusion and sustainability and making sure that everyone feels like they have a safe place. And so I'm not afraid to call out the bullshit. And I think that's part and parcel as to why I've flocked to this space and tried to embrace it holistically, because of the fact we have a very unique opportunity to shape the ground that we're walking on. And intention and good action is important to that. And so for me, this space was sort of always kind of like pitched as the new frontier, or the way in which we can build true equity and self-sovereignty. And so I'm here to call that bluff, to really see if it's really about that. I've been used to blockchain since like 2011. I'm a part of the old stories of people who had some coins at one point and then lost it and can't recover it. No big deal there. But I think after 2017, I've really got a chance to really think about what blockchain could do and how to build around it, or how to build with it. I had done a lot of bounties through like Gitcoin. I had done some stuff through Consensus in 2019. And then after kind of like being a part of that hackathon circuit, I just kind of let it go. And then last year, I was just, for some reason, dead set on owning a CryptoKitty, and didn't necessarily know why I wanted to do that. And it wasn't until my friend Leighton, shout out to Late Effects on Twitter, told me that he was selling Instagram filters on the blockchain, that everything sort of clicked. And after he showed me a Rarible profile, I really sort of understood that this actually could work. And so ever since, I've been kind of just like, I was at first experimenting with my artistry and seeing what I could do in the space. As an artist, it was one of the only things that really got me thinking about pursuing art again. I'm by and large a designer and worked in corporate and like startups forever. But this was something I could really kind of like take hold and shape in the way that I wanted. And then I realized that, even though we have a decentralized environment and like we have the affordance to build these equitable and inclusive spaces, it still requires human work. And I realized that there wasn't a lot of that being done. So I just was like, okay, well, I want to still do art, but I think this is also very important. And so I want to like focus on kind of filling in these gaps and building infrastructure. And so that's why I'm here. And that's why we're all here for MintFund. So
Thank you. And I want to touch on kind of immediately on two of the words that you introduced because they really, really relate to either community or maybe the opposite of that. So maybe also a few words of introduction to me. My name is Michail. I work at Zora as the curator. And my background is actually in a lot of grassroots culture. I'm come from electronic music, from underground electronic music, where I've been working with a lot of small electronic music communities all over the world. And the focus is in particular in community because electronic music is in particular defined by communal structures, which means structures that build mutual space, hold that space together, support each other out of principle, and not because there's some sort of financial gain out of it. And it's incredibly powerful. And I, through of course COVID, that made electronic music completely impossible. You know, looking at new spaces, NFT of course became a very interesting alternative proposition, and not for art, but rather to renegotiate power relationships that are always present in art and in the way artists relate with the systems that enable them to do the art. And that also informs the possibilities of artists to kind of build communities. You know, and in an analog world, this is a lot of manual labor. You know, you build out a space, you maintain that space. In the digital world, this is a little bit different. So Ameer, you said two things. First of all, you mentioned the word anarchism, and you also mentioned the word sovereignty. Now, a lot of people equate, in particular, blockchain with the idea of sovereignty. You know, where everybody can kind of build up their own island. You know, be their own island, kind of define the rules of engagement with him or herself, which seems to me a little bit opposing the idea of actually communal structures. Well, sure, you can build community, but my understanding of community is that with a community comes also a certain rules of conduct that are sometimes informed by principles, in terms that you do things even if you kind of maybe not agree with them, but you do them because they're part of that, contract that you have within that community. So because you're the longest within crypto art and blockchain in this group, tell us a little bit, your perception of how community has been built out in those largely digital spheres and what you felt lacking.
Word, yeah. So I think how community is sort of formed is, it's always a commonality, right? That's found first. People flock to a thing because they like a specific thing for a certain set of reasons. And I think, interestingly, because we're dealing with art, for instance, art is like it's very ubiquitous. It's just one of those things that is, art is culture in so much as, culture is just like this intangible, tangible thing that we all contribute to in some form. And so art is like the pinnacle of that in many ways. And so when you have like work that's being created and talked about, those that are around when that moment is sort of happening become a part of that initial community, whether they are diametrically opposed to the work that's being done, or they completely agree with it, or they fall somewhere in between. And so what ends up happening is that there's a conversation that's formed around the general consensus of how people think about that work. Whether it is infused within them, whether they deal with it on a daily basis, or again, they don't like it. And so that's kind of like how you have like these like communities that are sort of like forming. And these are all fine because everybody can have their own particular pockets and kind of like speak to the things that they like or that they don't like. The problems that end up happening, though, is when you introduce commerce into these types of communities, right? And certain communities get more of the commerce. And what ends up happening in a lot of chains or a lot of spaces that create this commercial layer is that we tend to see monocultural consumption, right? Where, a certain set of parameters are floating up at the top of these sort of communities and largely ignoring other ones. And so if these communities don't have the right type of components, and sometimes it's rooted in a lot of different tangible intangibles, like race, for example. It's a quasi-tangible thing because we can see physical differences within each other. But honestly, it's a social construct that means no fucking thing at all. Like it shouldn't even exist, but it does. And so because we have a social construct like that, that could be a modifier in which commerce then says, does it fit this criteria? If not, we're not really going to pay that much attention until it becomes so much of a thing that now we have to buy into it. And so that's the thing that I noticed, is that there's monoculture when it comes to what's being purchased and what's being consumed more often, what's being talked about, and then what's being highlighted. And when you have that kind of division from a monetary perspective, then that's when we have a lot of issues. Again, if you're a community, it's fine if every community doesn't necessarily like mesh or talk to each other. That's okay. Everybody has their own pockets. But money becomes a signifier of value for many people, and it's a very binary thing for them. And so when you start assigning monetary value to one particular groups of communities versus another, then we start to see a structure of power imbalance. And we start to see, the imbalance of, what gets propped up and what gets talked about. We have this concept of what happens first within crypto, and a lot of people are chasing that next first. And there are a lot of communities that have done these things prior to, but because they don't have the resources, which could be monetary, because people aren't putting value in their work or in their community, that's largely ignored. And then other people are first, which is in many ways culturally erasure. And so that's the stuff that I noticed, is that the way in which value is derived within communities from a monetary perspective is creating a large imbalance on how these communities can operate.
But I mean, ultimately, what you're also saying is that even though blockchain very often promises to renegotiate a lot of those power imbalances that are quite often structurally ingrained into the way society operates, just because we're claiming to build new contracts, that a lot of that is basically being carried over one by one in terms of even like all the way to the biases, because what you say, when you talk about a monoculture, that means that the attention of a largely space populated by white patrons of the art, white artists, benefits also exactly that socio-demographic markup, whereas that's exactly the issue that we on one hand promise to overcome, the traditional art world that does not let in marginalized communities, but nonetheless, that is being at large reproduced. That ultimately the lay of the land at the moment.
And to that point too, like, I think in terms of the culture that's being built right now, the opportunity that we have at the MintFund to really be conscious of this is something that we're all really thinking about as we build up the MintFund. And for people that are tuning in and maybe don't have like the background on how that started, I think that'd be like really great for Ameer and Carlos to tell how that happened.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it, Carlos.
Yeah, I think Ameer, really goes really deep into this stuff, and he's really, involved in so many ways, which is amazing to see him on his mission. And it was really the way everything started for MintFund was just, I forgot his, I think it was Lex, I'm not sure, an artist on Twitter, like these days everything started on Twitter, and he was like, can someone, send me, each $10, and then for me to mint a piece on Zora. And if I make sell, everybody gets a piece of it, right? So the moment I saw it, I was like, yeah, why not? Like, right. So I sort of like reached out to Ameer. We previously had talked before, and we sort of put the money together, and he ended up selling it so fast. And then out of nowhere, Ameer is like, Carlos, like, where do you want me to send you the your piece, right? So I was like, what do you mean? He was like, yeah, so the money we send, right? So it sort of started that way. And then I was like, what if we can put that amount, to help other artists or creators that want to mint? And you know what? We'll just give them Zora invite as well, right? And from that point, it sort of spin out with, Jacob also helping there. And we're like, we're turning this into a DAO, and let's make sure that we get as much people to get started with minting and all of that, right? And this has been like a month or so, but the journey, it's so crazy how it started, and the way we're implementing everything now, and we're making sure that not only we help artists mint their first piece, but we're also providing them like mentorship and sort of like really like the whole process, right? So like, how can we make sure, because like just the process, I really feel like some sort of fulfillment when someone from MintFund mints a piece. It's just such an empowering step forward for the new internet, right? But yeah, that's how it started. And Ameer can go really deep into that, because he definitely was involved into helping so many other artists getting started. But yeah, that's pretty much how it went. And now we have, you can see how the community is evolving, how everybody's helping each other. Yeah, happy to touch on community a little bit, but Ameer would be great to just tap in a little bit there, and yeah.
Yeah, no, you basically did it. Yeah. Shout out to my friend Leighton again, Late Effects on Twitter. Yeah, he was like, I want to mint a song on Zora, and like what Carlos said, put up some bread. And so we did. I ended up getting like $600, and I'm just like, I DM Carlos with the quickness, like, bro, like, you just got $100. He's like, are you kidding me? I'm like, yeah, man. And yeah, I mean, again, like I what's interesting and what's not lost on me is how Twitter has sort of become like this this tool to galvanize community around crypto culture, and the fact that we were able to get such an expedient and like big response from a tweet that was very kind of just like, we wanted to just pay it forward, and we didn't necessarily really anticipate the fact that it would become an actual like entity that can be responsible for starting up many artist careers. But in many ways, I kind of just feel like there were a lot of other working pieces that we all were a part of that kind of culminated in this, right? Like for me, as I got more into the space, I was hosting Clubhouse rooms, becoming a crypto creator since last December, where I was doing like a whole week-long thing of just taking people all the way through the entire process, from knowing about cryptocurrency, getting a digital wallet, buying ETH for the first time, all the way through the mint process, knowing all the different marketplaces that you could mint on, and then how to manage money and everything like that. Like I was trying to field lawyers, CPAs to talk about money management, because I think there's a lot of other stuff too in this space that a lot of people don't really harp on or talk about. They'll say, oh, it's, we want to like make sure all artists are earning, but then what do you do with the money that you earn from sales, right? Like you could just reinvest that back into yourself. You could reinvest that back into artists. But if you're not careful, especially because we're dealing with very regulated or not very, but like somewhat regulated space within the United States, if you are not careful, you will be screwed. And so it's very important too to also have, when we're talking about sort of creative freedom and self-sovereignty there, also harping on the financial freedom and financial sovereignty, being able to really truly understand how to manage the funds that you have, because this is not like a bank that is doing it for you. You are responsible for a lot of this stuff. So it's a huge mental shift and that we're doing here. And I think because we've all arrived at this point in time to where we've had that mental shift about how we operate in this space, it kind of works. It speaks well to kind of like the chemistry that we have at MintFund and like what we're trying to do, even though it's like kind of a snowball that's chasing us at this point. Or at least that's how I feel. Like we were rolling it, and then now it became too big, and then I'm ahead of it. Like, oh shit! Like this thing is gonna take me out. So
that's how it goes with the best things. When they grow faster, then you can chase them, because that informs also, that makes you proactive. But also a lot of that was also kind of I remember, Ameer, you and me had a conversation months ago also about this idea of digital communities of care, where we were discussing that. And this is also one of the things that I was observing, that a lot of young artists were finally, getting to a point where they could make money with art that they thought would be a hobby, probably always. Maybe if they're lucky enough, they might, get a commission from a brand, but they never thought that they would be able to make a living with it. And then I saw also a lot of big artists who obviously already had a platform, now just were able to make an even better living, and that started the thought process also, where if we are really claiming to build out a new artistic community, what are then the support structures that will foster an understanding of solidarity and understanding of meaning, and that also holds people accountable for contributing out of principle and not just because, nepotism. And when you look at, crypto, and especially about communities that are very much Twitter based, quite often support means retweeting, but that's not really support. That is the lowest, this is just a technological function that if it wouldn't be built into the interface that you use, you probably would not do it because it's very convenient. And whereas, in real life, and then Samantha, you probably will be able to confirm that if you're an artist who is part of a group, part of a collective, part of an atelier, community means access to infrastructure, access to support, emotional support, even not just support in terms of help you get something going, but it's like, here's a shoulder to cry on, and resources, right? That is the beauty of having that. And how do we build that out in a digital sphere?
Yeah. And to like go off of that, I think that's, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I really do see that as what's happening at the MintFund right now, in terms of like the additional layers of support that we're giving to artists. Carlos organized a workshop with Osinachi where they were able to give advice to artists about what goes into minting a work. We had Cooper Turley, who is just another very vocal voice in the space, lead an introductory workshop about the lay of the land. And I think that artists that are coming into the crypto space, there is like such a steep learning curve for them, that by having this community available to artists that are just learning about minting is so crucial right now. Like from my own experience, to see the artists really getting to know each other and wanting to collaborate with each other and help each other out, I think that's invaluable. And even after they mint something with us for the first time, to see like those relationships really cement in the space is what I'm looking forward to, seeing how we continue this.
I mean, one of the things that's also incredibly important, and pretty much everyone who's watching, who maybe, when they try to understand NFTs as well, there's very little canonical language. There's a lot of half knowledge. And I felt when I was looking into, now there's luckily a little bit more sociopolitical discourse around it and quality discourse. But until very recently, half of the things you would read online felt either as a pitch or an investment scam or some half truth. And to be able to build a community where artists who are not plugged in, who are maybe not quite tech savvy, will have a community that already verifies the knowledge, that gives them also the support. Because ultimately, one thing that we also see is that there's also very critical conversations around NFTs, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what it is, what it stands for. And most people, what they see is just a bunch of crypto-rich white people prepping up rich white artists, and in combination then with some questions about ecological footprint and so forth and so on, a lot of artists who venture into that face conversations that might be not prepared for, and that might sometimes be unfair for them to have individually. So building also an information database, educational database that equips them with the right understanding and language is also one of the jobs. Not only of MintFund, actually of anyone who's out there doing this, but we decided to make that our main focus.
Absolutely. Knowledge is key. And the best people who have the best knowledge are those who are always seeking and always asking questions and always figuring out how to distill what they're picking up, what they're learning, what they're able to synthesize from others into a way in which they can give to someone else. And that takes a lot of intentional thought work too, to trough through all the noise, to really kind of look and find what's out there that really actually is helpful. When it comes to a lot of the discussions about saying, oh, NFTs are like, money grabs, or, it's a Ponzi scheme, or, it's contributing so much to the environment. And it's like, well, let's take a look and break down sort of like what these actually mean, what claims you're talking about. And then, sometimes too, even have the experiment in saying, okay, if we even considered these that are not true to be true, for example, what else is mirroring in the real world these types of examples that you might already be actively participating in that you may or may not know of, right? And I think what ends up happening is, because stuff is new, and this is no different, right? Anytime technology is new, there's going to be a lot of resistance against it, right? Because we all go through the cycle of something is new, it starts to catch on. A lot of people are catching on to it, all the way down to those who are late. And then by the time those folks who were deniers or didn't agree with what was new become late adopters, a new thing's already happening. So they're always in like this catch-up mode of trying to figure out where they're going to fit, because they don't want to accept the fact that they can find footing in a new thing. And this is not just about technology. This is about culture too. Culture moves the exact same way. There's going to be a bunch of people. Art moves the exact same way. We think about art history over the past, like especially in the 20th century, it was almost every decade somebody was saying, "Oh, that's Dada art. Fuck that. Like we're gonna do something else. Oh, that's expressionism. We don't care about that. This is impressionism now." So there's always this this new wave of folks kind of shouldering and moving on. And so we have to, I think for us, it's very important that we take heed with what's happening and make sure that we are a space that we can distill the best in information as possible. And also still be kind of like that shield and say, hey, like, what I noticed on Twitter all last, like a lot of this month, was especially related to the ecological conversation, was that there were a lot of people who weren't aware of what's actually happening in the space, that is citing old research from a group that didn't actually have the most accurate information at the time, to then attack artists, right? And then after that point was happening, when they were talking about the financial situation, they were also still attacking these artists. And so what ended up becoming a place where, we're talking about open and active participation became a toxic environment for a lot of people. And that leads to real physical harm, mental harm, emotional harm, that a lot of people aren't really taking into account. In that, when you are a part of something new, it requires you to be very strong, because you have to have the mental fortitude to take on what's happening, to say that you're going to be a part of this experiment to see if something is possible for us in this future. And what does that look like? And being an active builder in that future requires that we got to take a little bit of dings. But hopefully, what we're building at MintFund is a safe space, so that we can dismantle a lot of those fears. We can talk about the stuff that's happening in the space in a real honest way and say, look, like, we don't know all the answers, but that's why we're building a brain trust of a community, so that we can all arrive at a point together that solves a lot of these issues. We have the mental space that we're saying we're going to fight, to build an equitable environment for all artists to participate in. And so once we have that mental framing, then the rest of it kind of like fills in itself, because everyone's going to say that's a mission that we can get behind, because we truly believe that this space can give us that affordance. And so it's just doing the everyday work. And I love the fact that we wake up and we do something about it, and it's fucking awesome.
I mean, that also two very important points that you all brought up. One is dismantling, and that means that dismantling means to dismantle structures within society that are also mirrored in the technological and artistic space that we move in. And those structures are often rooted in white supremacy, sexism, ableism, racism, but also Eurocentrism, and also an extension of Eurocentrism, also, focus on North America. And when we speak about, building equity, we cannot have that position rooted in these immediate realities, which very often are very privileged realities, because a lot of people, and this is like what upsets me when I look at crypto conversations, and people come along with the statements like, oh, this is universally accessible, there are no entry boundaries, but there are so many structural and systemic boundaries until somebody can even enter this, and those need to be also addressed. If you take the word equity into your mouth, then you need to go all the way and maintain an equitable proposition for everyone, and understand where are the boundaries and how can you overcome that. And that is also one of the reasons why we actually not just have inspirational conversations, but actually taking money into our hands to at least compensate for some of that. Because for many people, I don't know the demographic layout of the people watching, but many artists that we engage with, $100 gas fee or $150 gas fee is a month's salary. And you cannot say, yo, for this incredibly exciting thing that potentially might work out for you, but there are some caveats, it's an experiment that we're all into, but invest that much money. That is technically an immoral proposition to make. And you do have, as a community, especially a community that's well off, to make sure that you extend support that is more than words, but also money, which is why MintFund actually also has a wallet with ETH that we use to support artists, and why we also knowingly chose to focus outside of North America and Europe, even though we're open to everyone, but there are also priorities.
Or yeah, I mean, you said it right there, right? Like people think equal and equity are two different things. And I think people say, oh, I want things to be equal. But equality, we kind of technically already have, right? Like there's, for the most part, especially if you're in European Union, America, almost a near equal access to stuff. But equity means that there are certain communities that need a little bit more PYT, right? Or TLC rather, like tender love and care rather, right? That's the right word, not the other one. Thinking of two different Michael Jackson songs. Anyway, but with that, right, that says, well, okay, they might need a different allocation of resources that everyone can sort of get an equal opportunity to get. And when we're practicing real equity, then that says, it's almost like there was a graphic that was released a while ago, and it had like equity of saying, there's a gate, and then there's like certain people with different heights, and then they put them with different crates, and they were like, oh, that's like equality, and it's like, great, but like equity is removing the fucking gate in the first place. Like, why is that even there? And so we need to be in the business of saying, if we're talking about equity, we are saying like we're removing every potential barrier that we can be ever present of. The most immediate is obviously funding, and then secondarily on top of that is then knowledge, right? And then after that, then everything else kind of like falls into play, where it's like once we imbue you with the way in which you can kind of engage in the space, we give you knowledge to know how to engage in the space in a meaningful way. Now it's about, okay, how can we help accentuate what it is that you're trying to do as a creative, what your story is, what your mantras are, what you stand for, what you're about. And so that you can present yourself in the best way possible when you're now operating in this space. Because ultimately, we could do a lot of the stuff that we're doing at MintFund to help people mint. But I feel like my goal is is that people who go through MintFund, I want to get their work sold. Yeah, that's the one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like real equity.
I found the edited version that is also about ableism, just really quickly.
Yeah, so it's like, it's weird. It's like, yeah, build a ramp, and it's like, that's great, but why do you need a gate there in the first place?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I think equity is hard to do. And I always say that there's like human work, and like we need to like, but it's like, it's hard to do, but I think the more you do it every day, it's like a muscle, right? Like practicing like anti-racism, like to be anti-racist, for example, to be anti-sexist, right? All these types of things, it's real active work, and you have to practice it, right?
It's lifelong work.
Exactly, because we're all trained. We've picked up certain things just depending on where we are and how we lived and how we've grown up, right? And so to dismantle means it's like it's an active engagement, an active practice in removing, like systems and tools of harm. And so some of the systems of harm are the ways in which we see each other. And by actively removing those things and practicing better habits of love and understanding, we get to a place to where we can create true equity, because now we're impacting folks from sort of like the metaphysical space too, not just what we're able to do with real tangible resources.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been really because I'm from a small island with like 50,000 population. My island specifically have like 3,000 people. So for me, access is one of the things that I look for the most. So I'm really into this, what happens when you sort of like level up the playing field a little bit for everybody, right? So, and one of the missions that it's now it's MintFund, but and the idea here is like, when we have conversations, Ameer, I always tell you, like, how can we multiply this effect, right? So we want to be able to mentor artists that are able to mentor their own, create their own MintFund essentially, right? So that's the whole idea here, right? And once you give these people that want to express whatever they do into this new this new thing that is so exciting called NFTs. But then once they find their niche, and then they sort of sort of onboard other artists or other people that want to express as well. So you multiply that effect. You give them the resources, you give them the financial incentive to do, especially on Ethereum now it is expensive. But the idea is here is like, how can we get this information, that, like you said, the knowledge out there, and reach as much people that we want? And the focus essentially is going to go to minority groups and people that really like have never heard of crypto and how empowering this thing can be, right? So for me, access, that's the mission, man. I want to get like people from every single corner in like in Africa somewhere, like some talented artist or some talented writer, some just apply for MintFund. We're going to give you everything that you need to to express yourself, and then bring your homies, your buddies, and everybody else, right? But yeah, that's the idea when I think about it, right?
I mean, since we're coming to an end, we have, I think, 2 minutes left. There's one very important thing that I wanted to say, because developers are watching us. And what I find at the moment, the most exciting thing about this is that as we're entering a completely new generation of the internet, where the tools to build things are so much more democratically accessible, you of all people who are coding, who are designing the systems, are the ones who can decide if you design the systems with ideas like solidarity, not just as a thing to tick at the checkout box, but as the rules of conduct codified, put into code as the base function of what you are to design. And that is the real power, because when Facebook, Instagram, all the platforms were designed, the only function, the base function they had, was the bottom line of whoever designed it in mind. And this is what we've been basically fighting against, or not being able to participate, because those systems were predestined in their outcome to privilege a selected few. And now we're at a process where we can actually make principled decisions about building out technological solutions that are principled, that are solidaric, that are intersectional. And the biggest power in that have the people who understand how to write code and who write code. Ameer, Samantha, what are your last words for the group?
I want to say that this was the first week that artists from the Mint Fund were able to mint their very first works. So yeah, we're going to be building out a gallery on the Mint Fund website to share all of their works once they're all ready. But yeah, everybody, I guess, follow us on Twitter and keep up with us there because there's a lot more incredible work to come.
Absolutely. Check us out at the Mint Fund on Twitter. Yeah, this was great. Michail, you said it. You hit the nail on the head, right? Those with the ability to create have a responsibility to think about how to create a more inclusive and equitable world. And if you don't really know what that looks like, then get with folks who do. We're building an amazing community at Mint Fund, and a lot of the very nice socioeconomic kind of like ideologies about equity and inclusion can be found there. So please check us out at mint.af or the mint.fund. Join our Discord, hit us up on Twitter. And of course, you have me as a resource on Twitter as well at Sirsu. I'm talking about equity a lot. It's literally what it's like Wheaties. So we're about this life. Let's do it.
Yep. Come join us and help us to really build a better world, because we don't have that many chances left in our lifetime to do so. And maybe we're going to be the ones who succeed. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Carlos, Samantha, Ameer. Thank you, ETHGlobal, for having us and being able, to have this conversation. And good hacking. Like, what do you say at the hackathon? Like, you guys participated in this. You good hacking, code speed. I don't know. Okay, this is bad. I'm sorry.
Bail him out,
everyone.
Samantha, Carlos, thanks so much for a much needed conversation and telling us more about how you're changing this thing with MintFund. And Michail, thank you for moderating. It was an excellent conversation, and we're super excited to see how this develops and grows as a community. Thank you so much.
Peace out.
And